coffee has been sitting on the counter for 40 minutes and I haven't touched it. I do that sometimes. Make a pot, forget about it, come back when it's gone cold. My daughter used to say I had the worst habit of starting things and not finishing them. She said it like a joke. I laughed like it was one. That was before. I'm 63 years old. I taught third grade for 31 years at the same elementary school in Decatur, Georgia. I know what it means to be patient. I know what it means to give someone more chances than they deserve, to believe that people are capable of becoming better than they currently are. I believe that about 8-year-olds who threw pencils and talked back. I believed it about my son-in-law the first time I met him. I kept believing it longer than I should have. His name is Terence. I want you to remember that name because everything that happened, every single piece of it, starts and ends with him. My daughter Nola met him at a conference in Atlanta about 4 years ago. She was 34, had her own apartment near Midtown, a good job in hospital administration. She had worked hard for everything she had. I had watched her work hard after her father passed kidney failure 2019, 2 months before the world shut down. It was just the two of us. We had never been the crying into each other's arms type, but we were solid. She called me on Sundays. We had lunch on the last Saturday of every month at this little cafe on Ponce de Leon that she had picked out because she knew I liked their egg salad. That was us, steady, reliable, there. When she brought Terence home for the first time, I made pot roast. I set the table properly, used the good placemats, the ones I only take out when something feels important. He walked in, looked around my house the way a contractor might look at a property he's considering purchasing, and said, "This neighborhood's been appreciating, hasn't it?" I smiled and said yes. Nola beamed at him like he had said something charming. I told myself I was being too sensitive, that I'd spent too many years reading children's body language, and now I saw subtext everywhere. He was probably nervous, probably trying to make conversation. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, the way I had been trained professionally and personally to do. That was the first mistake. Over the next year and a half, I watched my daughter change in ways I couldn't name at first, small things. She stopped calling on Sundays and started texting instead, shorter messages, less detail. The monthly lunches became every 6 weeks, then every 2 months. Then she'd cancel last minute with reasons that were always just slightly too polished. She stopped asking about my garden, which she had always pretended to care about, just enough to be sweet. She stopped saying, "I love you," at the end of phone calls, and started ending them with, "Okay, I gotta run." I told my neighbor about it once, just in passing. She said, "Honey, that's what happens when they fall in love. Don't take it personal." I didn't say anything. I poured her more iced tea. But I was taking note, quietly. The way you do when you're not sure yet whether you're seeing something real. Then Terence started coming to Sunday dinners alone. Not every week, just often enough. He'd show up at my door. Nola was stuck at work. Nola had a headache. Nola had something she needed to handle. And he'd sit at my table and eat my food and talk to me about real estate. Always real estate. He was in commercial property development. He talked about it the way some men talk about God, with total conviction, like the rest of the world just hadn't caught up yet. "You know, this house is sitting on something," he said one evening. I had made chicken and dumplings. He had taken seconds. "I know," I said, 37 years of my life." He laughed. He had a way of laughing at things I said seriously, as if we both knew I was being quaint. "I mean the land value," he said. "Half an acre in DeKalb County, this close to the city. You're sitting on real money, Miss Lorraine." I told him I wasn't planning to sell. He said, of course, just something to keep in mind. But he kept mentioning it. Every time he came, different angles, different approaches. Once he brought a printout, an actual printed sheet, showing comparable properties in the area and what they'd sold for in the past 18 months. He slid it across the dinner table like we were in a meeting. I folded it once, and set it to the side and offered him sweet potato pie. I still didn't say anything to Nola. I thought about it. I rehearsed conversations in my head while I was gardening, while I was in the shower, while I was driving to the pharmacy. But every time I got close to the real words, something stopped me. She seemed happy. She was smiling in a way I hadn't seen since before her father got sick. I didn't want to be the one to crack that. So I waited. The engagement happened in December, Christmas morning, at his parents' house in Buckhead. She sent me a photo before she called. A ring on her hand, her face bright, like a child who had just gotten exactly what she asked for. I stared at that photo for a full minute before I called her back. "Mom, isn't it beautiful?" I said yes, it was a beautiful ring. That part was true. "He proposed in front of the whole family," she said. "Everybody was there. It was perfect." I was not there. I had not been invited to his parents' house for Christmas. I had spent December 25th alone with my cat and a pan of cornbread dressing and a movie I didn't finish. I mentioned this gently. I said I wished I could have been there. She said they had kept it small, just his immediate family. I was her immediate family, but I didn't say that. I said congratulations. I said I was so happy for her. I hung up and sat in my kitchen until it got dark. The wedding planning started in January and was finished by August. 11 months from engagement to ceremony. I know because I counted. I was not asked to help plan it. I was not consulted on the venue, the guest list, the catering, or anything else. Nola showed me photos as decisions were made, after the fact, the way you show someone a renovation once the walls are already up. I did ask once if I could be involved in choosing the flowers. She said Terence's mother had a contact at a florist they were already working with. I said that was fine. It wasn't fine, but I had spent my whole life not making things harder for the people I loved, and I couldn't seem to stop doing it even when they had stopped extending me the same courtesy. The rehearsal dinner was a Friday evening in October, at a private room at a restaurant in Midtown that I know charges $200 a plate because I looked it up afterward. Terence's family sat at the center table with the couple. I sat at a table near the back with two of Nola's co-workers she'd stayed close with, people I had met twice in my life. No one came to check on me during the meal. No one introduced me. When the toasts happened, Terence's father spoke for 8 minutes. His mother spoke for 5. A college friend of Terence's who I had never seen before spoke for 3. Nola looked at me once across the room. I smiled. She looked away. I drove home alone and sat in the driveway with the engine off for a while before I went inside. The wedding was a Saturday. Outdoor ceremony at a venue in Roswell, tents and string lights and white chairs set in perfect rows. It was a genuinely beautiful setup. I arrived on time, in the navy dress I had bought 3 months earlier, and had taken in at the waist by a seamstress because I'd lost some weight without really meaning to. My hair was done. I was ready to be her mother at her wedding. I was seated in the 3rd row. Not the first, the 3rd. Terence's parents were in the 1st row, his aunt and uncle, the 2nd, me, 3rd row, with 2 cousins of his I had never met, a woman who smiled at me politely and then spent the rest of the ceremony looking at her phone. I did not make a scene. I know some women would have. I sat in the 3rd row and watched my daughter come down the aisle in a dress I had not seen until that moment, and she was beautiful. She was so beautiful it hurt to look at her, and I pressed my hands together in my lap and kept my face still. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour, I tried to find her. She was moving through the crowd, the way brides do, pulled in every direction, laughing, holding her dress. I waited. I was patient. I've always been patient. When she finally came near where I was standing, Terence was with her. He had his hand on her back. She saw me, and something crossed her face, something I couldn't fully read. And then she leaned in and said, almost into my ear, "Mom, I need you to go sit with the people at table 12. Terence's clients are at the head tables and we need the family seating for them. You understand, right? I looked at her. You're putting me at a table with strangers, I said. Quiet. Even. They're not strangers. Mum, please don't make this a thing, please. I looked at her for another moment. Then I looked at Terence, who was studying a point somewhere above my left shoulder. I picked up my clutch. I walked out of the reception tent, across the parking lot, and to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes. Then I drove home. She did not call that night. She called the next morning, Sunday, at 9:47 a.m. I know because I looked at my phone when it rang and then set it back on the counter and watched it ring. She called again at 10:15, then at 10:30. I answered the fourth call. Mum. Her voice had a different register in it than it had at the wedding. Something heavier. I said hello. Mum, I need to talk to you about the house. I was quiet. Terence has a project, a development opportunity. He's been looking at properties in your neighborhood, and we think, if you were willing to sell, the timing could be really significant for us, for our future. There's a buyer already. We just need you to say yes. I sat down in my kitchen chair, the same chair I've sat in since 1999. You're calling me the day after your wedding, I said, to ask me to sell my house. Mum, it's not like that. We've been wanting to talk to you about this. The timing, I said. A silence. Mum, we love you. We just need you to think about what makes sense financially. You're alone in that house. It's too big for one person. We could find you something smaller, something easier to maintain, and the equity from the sale could. I put the phone down on the table, not hanging up, just setting it down. I could hear her still talking, faintly, like someone in another room. I sat there for a while, long enough for the voice from the phone to stop. Then I picked it up again. I'll call you back, I said, and I hung up. I called my attorney at home. She had been my attorney for 12 years, handled my husband's estate, knows my financial situation better than I know it myself. Her name is Ms. Hightower, and when I told her what was happening, there was a pause on her end. And then she said, Lorraine, I need you to come in Monday morning. I was there at 8 o'clock. She had a pot of coffee ready and a yellow legal pad in front of her. She explained some things to me that I had not fully understood before, that my house, being mortgage-free and in my name alone since my husband's passing, was mine outright, that no one could compel me to sell it. But she also explained something else, that if I had signed anything, agreed to anything in writing, or named anyone as a beneficiary or joint owner without realizing the full implications, things could become complicated. She asked me to walk through every conversation I had ever had with Terence about the property. I did, all of it. The printout at the dinner table, the casually dropped numbers, the framing of my house as an asset rather than a home. Miss Hightower wrote notes. She asked one question. Did he ever give you anything to sign? I told her about an envelope he had brought by in March. He said it was just some information, preliminary paperwork about what a sale process might look like, nothing binding. I told him I would look at it. I had never opened it. We found the envelope in a drawer in my study, underneath a birthday card from my sister and a coupon for a grocery store I haven't used in 2 years. Ms. Hightower opened it and went through the pages. One of the documents was not informational. It was a listing agreement, pre-filled with my name, my address, and a signature line. She looked at me over her glasses. I never signed it, I said. I know, she said. That's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about what he thought you might do with it eventually. We spent the rest of that morning making sure everything was properly documented, titled and protected. She walked me through updating my estate plan, adding explicit language about the property, making sure there were no ambiguities that could be exploited. She also told me that the listing agreement he had brought me was legally unenforceable, even if I had signed it without proper disclosure, but that the fact that he had tried, that he had prepared it in advance with my name already on it, told us something important about his intentions. "He's been planning this for a while," she said. "I know," I said. I did know. I think I had known since the printout at the dinner table, maybe even since he looked around my house that first night like he was appraising it. Nola called again on Tuesday. I let it go to voicemail. Then again on Wednesday. On Thursday I picked up. She had a different tone now, something that had been polished down into something harder. "Mum, Terence says you went to a lawyer." "I did," I said. "You didn't think to talk to us first?" I took a breath. "You called me the morning after your wedding to ask me to sell my home. I didn't think more conversation was the first step." "We weren't trying to pressure you. We were." "He brought me a listing agreement in March," I said, "already filled out, with my name on it." Silence. "He was just trying to get ahead of the process," she said, but her voice had slipped slightly. Something in her had moved. "Nola." My voice was steady. I made sure of it. "I have lived in this house for 37 years. Your father and I bought it together. You grew up in this house. I am not selling it. I am not selling it for Terence's project, or for timing, or because it makes financial sense. It is my home. And I need you to understand that what he did, what you both did, is not something I'm going to forget." Another silence. Longer. "Are you saying you're cutting us off?" she said. "I'm saying," I told her, "that I'm not a resource." I heard her breath catch, just slightly. We stayed on the line for a few more seconds without speaking. Then I said I had to go, and I did. I had a rosemary plant in the backyard that needed trimming, and it was a nice enough morning to be outside. I won't tell you that everything resolved itself neatly. It didn't. That's not how these things work. Nola and I have spoken 6 times in the 4 months since the wedding. The conversations are careful and short, the way conversations are when both people know there's a room in the house. Neither of them is ready to go into yet. She has not apologized. Not directly. She called on my birthday and sang the song and seemed like she meant it, and I thanked her, and we talked about whether I was still planning to visit my sister in Memphis in the spring, and it was almost like before. Almost. I don't know what is happening in her marriage. I don't ask. I think she is beginning to see certain things on her own, in the quiet of her own life, in the ways that truth always eventually surfaces, whether you invite it or not. I believe that because I have to, because she is my daughter, and I know who she was before he got to her, and I think that version of her is still in there somewhere, waiting. Terence has not contacted me again. Miss Hightower sent a brief professional letter to his attorney, outlining the state of my property ownership and gently noting that any further solicitation would be unwelcome. I don't know exactly what that letter said in full. Ms. Hightower said I didn't need to know every word, and she was probably right. The house is still mine. I want to be clear about that. The garden is still mine, the kitchen, the chair I've sat in since 1999, the hallway where my daughter's school photos hang in frames that have yellowed at the edges, all of it still mine. Some mornings I walk through the room slowly, not because I'm sad, but because I want to feel it. The floors, the light through the west window in the afternoon, the particular creak of the 3rd stair. I worked for this. I stayed for this. I am not a property to be developed. My neighbour brought me pumpkin bread last week. We sat on the porch for an hour without talking about any of it, and it was one of the better hours I've had in a while. Simple, uncomplicated, 2 women on a porch in October with something warm in their hands. I thought about what I would say to Nola if she ever asked me, really asked me, why I did what I did, why I called the lawyer, why I didn't just sign the papers and keep the peace and be grateful that my daughter had someone who seemed to make her happy. I think I would tell her this. I spent 31 years teaching children that what belongs to you is worth protecting. Not out of stubbornness, not out of selfishness, but because if you don't protect it, you're teaching everyone around you that it was never worth much to begin with. This house is worth something, not because of what it would sell for in the current market in DeKalb County, but because of what it cost, because of what we poured into it, your father and I, in the years before you were born and the years after, because of the Thanksgiving dinners and the homework at the kitchen table and the summer mornings sitting exactly where I'm sitting right now, watching the yard go green again. I didn't protect it to punish you. I protected it because I am still here, and it is still home, and some things should not be signed away across a dinner table while someone eats your chicken and dumplings and calls you by your first name. The coffee is still cold. I'm going to pour it out and make a fresh pot. And when the phone rings, if it rings, I'll answer it. I'm not going anywhere. I keep coming back to the envelope in the drawer. Not because it frightens me anymore, but because of what it represents, all that panning, all that patience on his end, waiting for me to be tired enough or lonely enough or grateful enough to sign something I hadn't read. He had my name already printed on the line. He just needed me to pick up a pen. And I almost did. Not that night, not that specific document, but in 100 smaller ways. Over those 2 years, I was always one soft moment away from handing something over. That's what I've had to sit with. How close I came. Not to losing the house, but to losing myself inside the story they were building around me. The story where I was the obstacle, the aging widow taking up space in a property that could become something more profitable. What stopped me wasn't anger. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't stubbornness either, though I know some people would call it that. What stopped me was something quieter, a kind of moral clarity that I think comes from having lived long enough to know the difference between a sacrifice you choose and one that's being chosen for you. 31 years of teaching children gave me that. You learn to see manipulation early when your whole career is built on watching how people treat each other when they think no one important is paying attention. Terence thought I wasn't paying attention. He was wrong. There's something I believe deeply, and I believed it before any of this happened, that how we respond to being wronged says more about us than the wrong itself ever could. I could have called Nola screaming the morning after the wedding. I could have made a scene in that parking lot, said things I couldn't take back. Instead, I drove home, I sat with it, and I made one phone call to a woman I trusted. That restraint wasn't weakness. It was the most important decision I made through this entire ordeal, because it meant that when things were resolved, I had not become someone I didn't recognize. My integrity was still intact. That matters to me more than winning. And the intelligence it took, not book intelligence, but the kind that comes from paying attention over a long stretch of time. That intelligence is what I'd spent years dismissing as just instinct. The feeling at that first dinner when he looked around my house. The feeling at every Sunday meal he showed up to alone. I knew. I kept filing it away and telling myself I was being uncharitable. I wasn't. I was reading the room correctly and then choosing not to trust what I read. That's the lesson I won't repeat. Your gut is not paranoia. It is information. What I want Nola to eventually understand, whenever she's ready, is that what I did without cruelty. I protected what was mine. I told her the truth plainly, and I left the door open. That's not nothing. It would have been easy to close it all the way. But I raised her. I know who she is, underneath whatever has gotten in the way. And I believe that a person's character, if it was built on something real, has a way of reasserting itself. You can't rush that. You can only hold steady and let time do what anger can't. The house is still here. I'm still here. And every morning I make a fresh pot of coffee and I sit in the same chair, in the same kitchen, in the home I am not ashamed to have protected. That's enough for me.